Episode 4. Family is Complicated. Silver, My Mother, and Me. Although I have been told how I was kidnapped at 6 months old by my father to make my mother take him back after a breakup, I do not remember anything at all from it. Sometimes I imagine I recall myself in the back seat strapped in a seatbelt flailing about, but I think it is creative fiction fabricated by stories that were told to me in my own mind's eye. My mother told me many times that if she had a gun when Silver, my father, had kicked in the door of the apartment to kidnap me, she would have shot him dead. She felt so completely powerless as he swept me away and threw me in the back seat and drove away, leaving her in tears, fearing for me, her son. She says I cried and flailed, but what could a baby do? Silver, my father, was ultimately intercepted by the police that very same day in his car, but he explained that my mother had lied and that she had told him to take me. He said that she was a drug abuser, often hiding her dope in stupid areas that most people don't look, like in a car air cleaner. The police doubted Silver's story, wanting to believe that my mother was the victim. So they took him back to my mother and the apartment where their car was. They searched her air cleaner, and sure enough, there was cocaine and marijuana. Silver had planted it there in case he was caught, and he executed his framing of my mother strategy very well. The police still did not believe it was real, talking with my mother, but they explained to her that if they arrested Silver, they would have to arrest her as well. And so the issue had to fade away. Sometime later, Silver came to my grandfather's home looking for my mother. She had taken refuge with him finally. But my grandfather had anticipated that the dark and evil Silver might someday return, and so he had a shotgun loaded in the closet next to the door in an umbrella holder. It had been there for a very long time, waiting for the moment that Silver might arrive. My grandfather was a long strategist when it came to planning. He told Silver that he would ask if my mother wanted to talk with him. But on turning around, he did not go to get my mother. He grabbed that shotgun and held it straight at Silver. And he said, "You get the heck out of here and you never come back, or I will shoot you dead. Straight away. No questions, no talking." I tell you this, the police will understand a father protecting his daughter from a criminal like you. And he pumped that shotgun, shell going in his chamber, as it was leveled straight at Silver's chest. Silver's eyes glazed, studying the veracity of my grandfather, and he decided he was legit. My grandfather was prepared to kill Silver. Silver respected my grandfather right then more than he ever had. And his code commanded that if you respect someone, then you honor them and their wishes when you can. And so, in a twisted world of logic for Silver, that day, he decided that he was done with my mother, and done with us, her children, after that confrontation with my grandfather, Joseph Milmo, who stood righteously opposing him with a shotgun. No one ever heard from Silver again. I once saw a newspaper article late in life that a Irwin Ross in his 60s had died from asphyxiation, possibly a suicide, while in an enclosed car with its exhaust fed back in to suffocate anyone inside. The man had died from breathing carbon monoxide, suffocating. Some say it was a gentle way to die, whereas others believe it was a terrible and slow way to drag yourself to oblivion. It does not seem to me like a good way to go, if there even is a good way to go, so to speak. Silver Seaborn's allegedly real name might have been Melvin Irwin Ross, and he had numerous identities and aliases, forged documents, all to support them. It is quite possible Irwin Ross, who died in that car in San Rafael, California, was my father. However, it is just as possible that my father, Silver Seaborn, is dead in a shallow grave in Mexico, or that he's running a huge, large cartel in Colombia or Mexico. I will never know what has become of my father, Silver Seaborn, the international gun runner and drug dealer. The simple story, you might wonder, how my mother met Silver. She met him in Cupertino, California, while she was attending Stanford University and living with her parents, who had at that time purchased a home in Woodside, California, nearby, just so that she would be there close to Stanford. Silver and my mother met for the first time near Stanford. He apparently was admiring my mother from afar, and she caught his eyes looking on her. He was a scruffy, unshaven bad boy, wearing a leather jacket, thick jeans, mildly dirty white t-shirt, and dark sunglasses. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and very manly. My mother swooned just seeing the man that he was. He overwhelmingly, as the phrase goes, did it for her. Seeing her respond to his gaze, he sauntered over and asked if she was a student at Stanford, to which she replied sheepishly, "Yes." He was very direct and said, "Hey, I'd love to get to know you. You want to have a drink tonight?" He did not even wait for a real answer, adding, "Can I pick you up right here, around 8 p.m. tonight?" My mother just answered, "Yes." Silver could tell she was highly motivated, so agreeable that she would pretty much say yes to anything. She had the personality that Silver liked, subordinate and awestruck, and he was right. My mother, Nancy, her lust for Silver was unseemly to her, but she felt it so strongly that she could not deny her intense attraction to him. Combining her irrational, lusty passion with her Catholic, oppressive pressure to subordination, Nancy was clay for Silver to mold. That night, my mother dressed up as best she could to impress. She always felt awkward, wearing eyeglasses early in life, and teased for it. She never felt pretty. She felt more uglier than okay. She concluded that she had to wear glasses to see others, or be blind beyond a few feet to look better. She ultimately looked fine in her glasses, but she did not have the self-esteem to believe that. My mother reflected on the only other date she had had since she came to California to attend Stanford. She had dated a psychology student, a man named Paul. He was a young, thin, ordinary build, average height, but he was smart, and he made sure everyone around him knew that he was smart. His intelligence, as he would evangelize to the point that no one dared to challenge him, for he would launch into such diatribes that would last so long that anyone could bear to listen no more. In other words, he would talk until they gave up and just agreed with him. But the psychology student's mediocrity did not actually limit Nancy's interest in him. She wanted a relationship, and she wanted Mr. Right now, even if it was not Mr. Right. Mr. Right now was sufficient while she dreamed of Mr. Right. Nancy's low self-esteem limited her reaching out to men for dates, and often turned off men that may otherwise had pursued her. Nancy had a complicated, candidly messed up view of relationships and of how men and women should interact. Consequently, Nancy was thrilled when Paul asked her out on a date. After 3 dates with Paul, it was clear that Nancy was losing Paul's interest. She asked directly if she should do something different to keep his interest. And Paul said he wanted someone sexier, and that she should wear pantyhose, skirts, maybe a little more exposing shirts as well. Nancy felt bad. She knew that she was ugly, and she knew that she needed to compensate for her poor and weak personality. She went out and acquired all of those things that Paul recommended: hose, a little teeny skirt, tight risque shirt, and a cute scarf to go around it. Paul was not really, though, into my mother, and all of those things that he told her to do were intended to hurt her, so that she would leave him alone and move on. But my mother did not understand his intent, and that he was actually being dishonest with her, and that he did not have sufficient integrity to tell her the truth. Instead, my mother concluded that no clothes or makeup or any effort she could make would ever make her pretty like the other girls. She would never be pretty enough for Paul. My mother would never get over Paul. Decades later, when I was 19 years old, Paul came up, and she melted down and ran into the bathroom and cried and sobbed. I do not know if there was more to the story that my mother has never shared. But my mother had and still has emotional baggage over Paul and her very low self-esteem. It has always made me sad that my mother let her appearance control actions and her own esteem and view of herself. It is because of that, though, that I believe she worked so hard to become an engineer later in life, focusing on her brain over her body. My mother would find herself overwhelmed in that bar when she met Silver on that first date. They were in a line when a man looked to my mother and made an insulting comment to her, and he demanded that she move out of his way. Silver has never tolerated opposition or insults to himself or anyone that he was with, and this would certainly be no exception. Silver's eyes glazed a bit as he stared at his offending dog of a man. Silver did not speak, but grabbed him, kneed him in the groin, uppercut his jaw, double elbowed his head down to the ground, and once he was down, Silver swiftly inserted a kick from steel-toed boots into the man's side. Silver, in the span of seconds, left that man utterly debilitated. Done. The bouncers came to the rescue, but they could not get anywhere near in time, and seeing Silver's glazed eyes turned towards them, they just asked him if he would leave. Silver always avoided public dilly-dallying for fear police might be called. So he took my mother out on his bike, a Harley Davidson, and they fled the scene. My mother tells the story as a great thing that made her fall completely in love with Silver, that he defended her with force, and that thrilled her. Although you have now heard tales of my youth and my mother and some of my father, but you might wonder, how did they meet? How would such polar opposites of a biker, drug and weapons dealer and Stanford graduate school teacher come together? How would they stay together for well over a decade? As detailed previously, Silver was not a good man. He was downright dangerous. He lived by a code. His code was rigid and absolute. Anyone crossing the code must be punished, often killed, for such extreme violation, transgression. Silver was the judge, jury, and executioner for absolutely anything involving the code. Silver found the code that he lived by comforting, as it justified his actions. It should, of course, since he created it in the first place. But it did give him confidence in his actions. The code served him well for decades, operating in criminal-infested waters within and outside the United States. Silver's exploits had attracted the notice of the FBI, and they issued federal warrants for his arrest. But he absconded into Mexico with my mother, where they were on the run for years. In an extreme moment in Mexico, he had pulled into a gas station to refuel his Harley, but the station owner and attendant demanded that he leave because he was a scumbag. He presumably judged Silver by his appearance and his motorcycle. Silver told him that he was going to buy the gas and that he needed a drink. The man repeated to Silver he must leave at once, and went inside as if to call for help or maybe get a weapon. Silver knew danger, and his wolf eyes turned on and my mother stiffened in fear. All hell could break loose, and it did. My future father charged inside, grabbed a tire iron from the gas station, and chased the man down the street as he fled for his life. Silver had clearly decided that he needed to have his skull hit with a tire iron to insert wisdom where there was none. Silver expressed many emotions freely, including violence, to make his point. He returned to the station and took 2 soda cans, filled his bike with fuel, and left money on the counter to cover the costs, seeing as the owner was now long gone. Silver declared, "We'd best get moving before the cops arrive." They peeled out and were back on the lam. Silver had received a moderate inheritance and convinced himself that he could turn it into a huge windfall if he gambled in Las Vegas. Even the moderate inheritance was enough to buy a small house for the era, but Silver's greed was far too great. He went to Las Vegas with my mother, and he gambled and he gambled, and he lost everything. But as he was losing, my mother saw his losing streak, and she had squirreled away small bits of money here and there so they might have enough cash to buy gas just to get out of Las Vegas should Silver lose all the money. He had no brakes or willpower to stop. He had faith that he could reclaim his lost money. My mother's hiding money proved to be problematic. When she revealed that she still had some money that they could get away and leave Las Vegas, he seized that money and declared it was his, and it would cede his return and regain of all the money he had lost. Like any true addict, Silver didn't understand that he would lose that money as well. It never happened. He did lose all the money. Silver and my mother had then no money, despite his inheriting money and my mother trying to save it. My mother ultimately had to sell what little things she had on hand just to get some cash, since they were virtually penniless. Silver had burned a huge opportunity to turn his life around, and it hurt my mother, and ultimately would hurt his children. My mother recounts her final straw tale with my father, Silver Seaborn. They had been in a Mexican bar, and he was sloshed, staggering drunk. He and my mother managed to get to Silver's Harley-Davidson motorcycle, stumbling all the way. Silver should not drive drunk at all, and on a motorcycle he would have even less probability of not crashing due to his only having 2 wheels after all, and no doors or walls. My mother knew it was dangerous, if not deadly, to ride the Harley being so intoxicated. If they could barely walk, how could they ride and not crash? But that did not stop Silver. He commanded my mother get on the back of the bike with him, and so she did. She was a good Catholic girl. Silver was always in charge, and my mother was always his girl, and correspondingly was subservient per her Catholic raising. She was trained, and she was believing that she was doing the right thing by getting on the back of that bike as commanded by my father. Silver barely left the parking lot, picking up speed on a gravel-covered, otherwise dirt and occasionally stony road in Mexico. The first rough surface was beyond Silver's dramatically reduced dexterity to react to, due to his massive alcohol consumption. The bike slid out from beneath him, falling to its side and grinding both my mother and Silver across the gravel and stony road. My mother broke her leg and was severely bruised, scraped, and cut. Silver somehow emerged with only minor scrapes and some bruises. He was a brute, and was born to be a man, and an absolute genuine danger to anyone that dared to confront him. His tank self seemed never to be more than bruised and cut a bit. He would never be downed. He could not be taken out of commission. He could not be defeated. Silver was sort of a anti-superhero.